I want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's hearing on the Small Business Innovative Research, or SBIR, and Small Business Technology Transfer, or STTR, programs. This is the third hearing that this subcommittee has held on these very important programs. Both of them were created over 25 years ago, designed to support and encourage small high-tech entrepreneurial firms and play a more important role than ever in the economy that we live in today. Almost a year ago, the House passed an SBIR reauthorization bill, H.R. 5819, which included the first significant changes to the program since its inception. This bill reflected not only the cost of research today, but also reflected the international competitive market American high-tech firms face and the recommendations of various research bodies that have had input about SBIR. Much has changed over the past 12 months. Today, we're looking to small high-tech firms to create the new products, services, and technologies that can rejuvenate our economy and make us more competitive internationally. When the SBIR and STTR programs were created, we didn't fully appreciate the power of small entrepreneurial high-tech firms to create economic growth. Companies such as Amgen, Apple, Genentech, and Microsoft all started as small entrepreneurial firms and now employ thousands or tens of thousands. Other companies started small and stayed small. All were innovators and drove economic growth. When SBIR and STTR were created, these companies were either in their infancy or didn't yet exist. In part because of SBIR and STTR, today the United States is a world leader in IT and in biotech. As the testimony indicates, SBIR and STTR supported companies are still driving innovation in the IT and biotech fields. The authorization for SBIR and STTR expires at the end of July, and given the current economic situation, we need to ensure that we structure these programs to reflect the current economy and the globalization of R&D. We can't afford to think we're the only country with first-class science and engineering talent. We need to foster the innovation that creates economic growth, jobs, and new products and services right here at home. Maintaining the status quo of programs created a quarter century ago makes neither good business nor policy sense. We must always keep in mind that it's the American taxpayer who pays for these programs. In these difficult economic times, we need to ensure they receive the highest return on their investment. We have a varied panel of witnesses here today representing small business and the NIH, which provides the second largest amount of SBIR funding of any federal agency. I hope they can tell us more about the economic challenges facing those firms and their thoughts on the program. At over $2 billion per year, the SBIR and STTR programs are now far and away the largest technological development programs or tech transfer programs in the federal government. I want to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today, and now I'd like to turn to our ranking member, the gentlewoman from Illinois, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing today on the role of SBIR and STTR programs in stimulating innovation at small businesses. As you know, our ranking member Smith was unable to be here at this moment. He might be in a little bit later, but he had an immovable conflict. But I'm pleased to have the opportunity to take his place as we examine this important program today. On this committee, we are, of course, well aware of the importance of innovation to economic growth and improved quality of life, particularly as we work our way through this recession. We recognize that advances in science and technology will help to enable short-term economic recovery as well as sustained prosperity over the long term. To this end, the SBIR and the STTR programs play a key role as an important part of overall federal R&D portfolio, serving to facilitate increased private sector commercialization of promising ideas while leveraging the unique capabilities of small business to help the government advance its R&D goals and meet its technological needs. Today's hearing represents a continuation of the SBIR reauthorization efforts undertaken by this committee and the House Small Business Committee during the 110th Congress. As such, it will focus on two primary changes under consideration last year. One is whether or not to increase the research set-asides that fund SBIR and STTR, and two, whether or not to relax restrictions on participation by venture capitalist-backed small businesses. These are very important issues that this hearing provides an opportunity for us to hear from the key stakeholders involved. With respect to the set-aside, it is important to remember the unique funding structure through which the SBIR and STTR programs are funded, through an assessment on extramural extramural federal research that is carried out by our universities and national labs. As a result, an increased set-aside comes at the expense of basic and applied research performed at universities and the national labs. And because of the large base from which the funding is derived, and even what might appear to be a minor increase in the set-aside from 2.5 to 3% for SBIR and from 0.3 to 0.6, that would be 0.3 and 0.6% for STTR, would result in a rough reduction of roughly $650 million to core agency research programs. For this reason, and because SBIR and STTR budgets have grown substantially over the last 10 years, I'm strongly opposed to increasing the set-aside. The issue of eligibility of majority venture capitalists-backed small businesses is significantly more complicated, but no less important. The origin of the dispute over this eligibility is due to the lack of clarity in and changing interpretations of the existing statutory definition of a small business. Regardless of what side of this issue one is on, I think we could agree that the solution is to define small business in a manner that maximizes the eligibility of legitimate small businesses while minimizing the inappropriate eligibility of large businesses. To this end, I'm concerned that the current SBIR rules may unreasonably exclude many legitimate small businesses, particularly in the biomedical sector due to its high dependence on venture capital to advance drugs and therapies through the regulatory approval process. I hope this is something that we will address in this upcoming legislation. This committee and the full House built a solid record of work on SBIR reauthorization during the 110th Congress, so I anticipate that we will be able to work cooperatively and swiftly to extend the SBIR program before its July 31st expiration. However, I hope and expect that we can do so through regular order so the committee members have an opportunity to review any changes to the legislation from last year and offer input and amendments as necessary. I thank our witnesses for being here today and waiting for us. We had those pesky votes, as you know, and I look forward to a productive discussion. And I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady and would just add that it is fully my intent to move legislation on this very important subject through regular order. But as the gentlelady fully understands, sometimes we have our intentions changed for us. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. I just want to note that I will be stepping away for a few minutes at about 3 o'clock, and I believe that the gentlelady from Maryland will be available to step in the chair for a while. Thank you very much. At this point, it is my pleasure to introduce our witnesses. Dr. Robert Berdahl is the president of the Association of American Universities, and I'd like to add a proud former Duck for almost 20 years. The Honorable Jim Greenwood is the president and CEO of the Biotechnology Industry Organization and well represented Pennsylvania for a dozen years. And I always thought that was such a long, long time, but I'm hitting the dozen mark soon myself, and it's amazing how perspective changes. Dr. Sally Rockey is the acting NIH Deputy Director for Extramural Research at the National Institutes of Health. And finally, Mr. Jere Glover is the Attorney and Executive Director of the Small Business Technology Council. Welcome, one and all. Your full written testimony will be included in the record of the subcommittee. Please, if you will, précis or summarize your written testimony. You will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony, and when you complete your testimony, we will hopefully have plenty of time for questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to answer questions. Dr. Berdahl, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wu, Congresswoman Biggert, and Congresswoman Edwards. It's a great privilege to present our association's views on the Small Business Innovation Research Program and the Small Business Tech Transfer Program. I have to note in the outset that I had the privilege of being a faculty member and an administrator at both the University of Oregon and the University of Illinois, and so I have some familiarity of the role that those universities play in the economies of those respective states. And
your attempt to curry a favorable impression has been very successful.
All right, very good. Well, let me begin my testimony by stating that the AAU supports SBIR and STTR programs as they're currently structured. We agree with the National Academy's assessment of these programs as being sound in concept and effective in practice. In the early years of SBIR, many of our campuses were critical of the program, viewing it as coming at the expense of funding that would have otherwise supported university-based basic research. In recent years, however, as our universities and faculty have become much more interested in commercializing new technologies, and our universities have come to support SBIR and STTR programs as they currently exist. To drive this point home, I would like to highlight an SBIR success story from Chairman Wu's home state of Oregon and my former university, the University of Oregon. Electrical Geodesics Incorporated, EGI, was a University of Oregon spin-off company. It was founded by U of O neuroscientist Don Tucker to develop advanced, non-invasive ways to visualize brain activity. Over the last decade, SBIR grants have played a key role in fueling EGI's maturation, growth, and expansion. As a direct consequence of SBIR support, EGI's geodesic sensor net can now be found in more than 350 laboratories in 28 countries around the world. Given the success of EGI and other SBIR firms, it is clear that the SBIR and STTR programs have played an important role in stimulating innovation at small high-tech firms throughout the country. The specific degree to which these programs are responsible for innovation, however, is not easy to assess due to a lack of sufficient data. According to the National Institutes of Standards and Technologies, more than $26 billion has been spent on SBIR and STTR grants, yielding 84,000 patents and attracting more than $36 billion in venture capital from more than 17,000 SBIR-funded companies. Despite the success of these programs, the NRC report makes significant recommendations about the need for better data collection and systematic assessment of SBIR and STTR programs, and we commend those recommendations to you. In your letter of invitation, you asked us to assess the current SBIR and STTR set-aside percentages. While supportive of the current set-aside, we oppose any increases in the SBIR set-aside because there is no indication that highly qualified SBIR proposals are currently being rejected for lack of sufficient funding. Moreover, we question whether there is enough small business research and of sufficient quality to merit an increase in the SBIR set-aside, especially if such funding were to come at the expense of peer-reviewed basic and applied research programs where success rates have hit all-time lows in recent years. Our view is that the best way to increase the amount of funding available to these programs is to provide steady and sustained funding increases for federally supported basic research. As research funding increases, the dollars available to these programs will also increase. At this point, the only modification we would encourage would be the slight increase recommended by the NRC in the percentage of set-aside that would be used for program management from the 0.03% to 0.05%. You also asked our views about venture capital in SBIR. AAU supports the subcommittee's view that firms with significant venture capital funding should be allowed to compete for SBIR and STTR awards. However, the current regulation effectively disqualifies small companies that have received significant venture capital or are owned by another company with significant venture capital investment from competing for SBIR or STTR funds. The AAU shares the view that the NRC that venture capital investment in companies seeking SBIR confirms the quality of those projects and would raise the quality of the applicant pool altogether. You also asked for thoughts concerning ways to improve the effectiveness of these programs. In responding to this request, I'd recommend to you the commendations made by the National Research Council in its 2008 report. There is one related issue that we would ask the subcommittee to examine in reauthorizing SBIR, Mr. Chairman. Even today's existing SBIR program, with those programs, there is a funding gap that often prevents universities from moving new research discoveries and technologies quickly into the marketplace. This bridge funding, often crossing the valley of death, as it's called, would be very, very important. Let me conclude. I see my time is up here. Let me conclude my remarks with a statement that I made earlier in my testimony, that these are sound and effective programs. It is clear that these programs are at their core good programs that help foster successful entrepreneurial opportunities for our nation's scientists, engineers, and innovators. These programs were created well over 20 years ago. They can be improved by adopting some of the NRC's recommendations. I also believe that it might be time to consider supplementing these programs with a new program aimed at providing additional gap funding. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, once again, I thank you for the opportunity to share AAU's thoughts. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Berdahl. We very much appreciate AAU's input into this process.
Thank you.
Mr. Greenwood, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wu and Congresswoman Biggert and members of the committee. I am Jim Greenwood, President and CEO of the Biotechnology Industry Organization, BIO, and I am privileged to be here this morning on behalf of BIO's more than 1,200 member companies, academic institutions, state biotechnology centers, and related organizations in all 50 states involved in healthcare, agricultural, environmental, and industrial biotechnology. Congress created the SBIR program in the early 1980s because it recognized that all too often promising early-stage scientific research lacked adequate funding and, as a result, perished in the valley of death. The importance of advancing science through the valley of death has never been more important than it is right now. In fact, in just the last several months, at least 25 of our companies have either placed drug development programs on hold or cut programs altogether. These include therapies for HIV/AIDS, cervical cancer, multiple sclerosis, and diabetes. Roughly a third of small, publicly traded biotechnology companies are now operating with less than 6 months of cash on hand, which is a 90% increase relative to this time in 2007. The total capital raised by the industry in 2008 is down 55% compared to last year. As such, it is more important than ever that government funding opportunities such as SBIR are made more accessible to America's cutting-edge companies. My recommendation to strengthen and improve the SBIR program can be grouped under the following three general goals. First, increase competition and foster innovation and commercialization by the best small companies. For 20 years, domestic biotechnology companies competed for SBIR grants. However, in 2003, the Small Business Administration's Office of Hearings and Appeals ruled that a biotechnology company, Cognitics, did not meet the SBIR size standard because multiple venture capital investors in the aggregate, and that's important, in the aggregate, owned more than 50% of the company's stock. The ruling, which is not based on the statutory language, ignores the reality of the marketplace where small biotechnology firms must raise tens of millions of dollars to conduct incredibly capital-intensive research. The SBA's 2003 ruling to exclude majority venture-backed companies inhibits the SBIR's program's access to the most competitive pool of applicants possible, and it stifles the ability of SBIR to carry out its mission to fund projects that will have the most commercial potential. The NIH's acting director recently reported that the number of SBIR applications has dropped over 40% since 2004, which is about the same time the SBIR participating agencies implemented the new SBA restriction on majority VC-financed companies. Bio respectfully requests that the committee reinstate the eligibility of small VC-backed biotechnology firms to compete for SBIR awards. This will ensure the most competitive pool of applicants and that grants will be awarded based on projects that show the most promise in bringing breakthrough therapies to the public. Second, Congress should clarify the SBI eligibility rules to make the application process more straightforward and more user-friendly. It is equally important the authorization clarify SBA affiliation regulations. Under current SBA regulations, when determining the size of a business, the SBA considers the number of direct employees at the business as well as affiliated business employees. These affiliation rules create a situation where a small company with 50 employees could be affiliated with hundreds of other employees of companies with which the small company has no relationship whatsoever, simply because the companies share a common investor, even where the investor owns a minority stake in the business in question. Bio recommends the reauthorization bill provide language to clarify that minority investment by a venture capital investor does not make the company an affiliate of another company for the purposes of determining size. This is a common sense measure that will provide clarity and peace of mind for small business entrepreneurs looking to participate in the SBIR program. Third, Congress should maintain adequate agency flexibility within the SBIR program. One of the great strengths of the SBIR program is that Congress has provided participating agencies with flexibility in how they administer the program. Maintaining flexibility is supported by a National Research Council 2007 report which states, quote, "Flexibility is a positive attribute in that it permits each agency to adapt its SBIR program to the agency's particular mission, scale, and working culture." Bio does not believe that a hard dollar cap should be applied to the SBIR grant amounts. Agencies should be the best judge of how to use their SBIR funds to advance science and to commercialize new innovations. By making necessary reforms to the SBIR program, Congress can continue to support the USA biotechnology community by allowing the government to partner with small biotechnology companies that have promising science but need additional resources at key stages of development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. Dr. Rockey, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wu, Congressman Biggert, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the NIH SBIR STTR programs and the role they play in stimulating innovation at small high-tech businesses. NIH is one of the largest funders of the SBIR STTR programs and the largest supporter of biomedical research that focuses on extending healthy life and reducing the burdens of illness and disability. The SBIR STTR programs are poised to fund early-stage, high-risk, high-quality research from which important medical advances can be developed. In fiscal year 2009, the total SBIR STTR set aside will be about $672 million. I'd like to begin by highlighting several SBIR innovations that have made differences and can make differences in people's lives. Altea Therapeutics, a Georgia company, developed a needleless infusion patch called the Passport System for a painless and controlled delivery of drugs such as insulin or vaccines such as hepatitis B antigen through the skin. Three Rivers Holding, an Arizona company focused on assistive technology, developing better wheels for wheelchairs. This smart wheel optimized wheelchair route to root out the cause of chronic pain in the shoulder, hand, or wrists of wheelchair users. SIG Technologies, Inc. in Oregon developed a small molecule inhibitor of smallpox virus replication. While smallpox has essentially been eradicated, it remains a formidable biowarfare threat. And finally, Biopsy Sciences in Florida developed Hydromark, a novel water-containing site marker used in breast cancer procedures. This technology is helping patients by replacing lengthy mammogram-guided localization wire procedures with a quick and accurate and more comfortable ultrasound localization. As a breast cancer survivor, I have personally experienced the excruciating procedure that this new technology can replace. I find it very satisfying that the NIH and the small business community contribute to helping women who are battling a life-threatening disease have one less painful procedure in what can be a grueling treatment regime. Stories such as this come from companies all over the United States and underscore the importance of SBIR to our mission. In support of the goal to increase commercialization of federally supported R&D, NIH has designed programs such as the Phase 1, Phase 2 Fast Track program and Competing Renewal Award to help our awardees negotiate the agonizing period between discovery and commercialization, or as we heard mentioned, the Valley of Death. In addition, NIH offers commercialization assistance by facilitating matchmaking. It's our version of Match.com with the NIH pipeline to partnerships. This is a virtual space where SBIR and STTR awardees can showcase their technologies, and it allows potential strategic partners, licensing partners, or investors to find them on this virtual space. And currently, we have over 100 technologies in this database. NIH is pleased that a recent study conducted by the NRC, the National Research Council, found that 40% of NIH's SBIR-funded projects are commercialized. Further, using a dynamic monitoring system that enables NIH to document the continued achievements of its SBIR awardees over time, we have found that about 50% have achieved sales. Other factors such as FDA approval, strategic partnerships, and investments also demonstrate our program's success. We attribute the success and effectiveness of the program to several factors. The most significant of this is the existing flexibility in our administration of the program to address the changing nature of biomedical research and accommodate the needs of multiple industries and diverse product outcomes. Examples include the ability of companies to propose their own project ideas and an opportunity to resubmit unfunded applications, and the ability to exceed the award guidelines in justified cases. Simply stated, one size does not fit all. Flexibility is critical at a time when science is changing rapidly, becoming much more complex and ever more expensive. Despite these program flexibilities and enhancements, as you already heard, and what we have observed is there have been some troubling trends. Specifically, the numbers of our applications have declined from 2004 through 2008 by nearly 40%. Though the reasons are not fully understood for this decline, this disconcerting trend may be related to certain disincentives that are either rendering worthy companies ineligible or driving them away for other reasons. For some, the award amounts or the current phase structures are not sufficient incentives for applying. For others, the process appears too competitive. New companies may find the process daunting or are unsure how to match their skills with our research areas. Some firms have lost their eligibility or may be confused by the eligibility criteria. For many biomedical technology companies, the SBIR program is an important source of seed funding for early-stage ideas of unproven feasibility, but venture capital financing is the only realistic way that their innovative product will enter the marketplace. Research in public health and biotechnology is characterized by high and intense capital needs, as you know, and to see these products from idea to market. Usually very long development times, exceptionally high burn rates for investment funds, and often multiple rounds of financing to fund the extensive and essential clinical research. Individuals alone simply cannot finance the hundreds of millions of dollars for necessary clinical phases to bring the product to market. The NRC study of the SBIR program noted that the synergies between SBIR funding and venture capital are useful. As the innovative process is not linear, even small business benefiting from venture funding may well seek SBIR funding as a means of exploring a new idea, for example, a new drug candidate. Keeping the pipeline full of new ideas is important because in today's high-risk biomedical research environment, the reality is that fewer than 1% of the innovative, promising projects reach the marketplace. Therefore, I believe appropriate incentives can strengthen the role of small businesses in stimulating technological innovation. In conclusion, I want to reemphasize the NIH's commitment to supporting small businesses and maintaining the integrity of the SBIR STTR programs. We look to small businesses to stimulate technological innovation, help us face new challenges, and to produce benefits for the public. We look forward to working with Congress on ways to reinvigorate the program, incentivize America's small businesses to participate, and create an environment enabling commercialization of health-related products and services that will sustain our national economy. That concludes my statement, and I'll look forward to answering any questions you have.
Thank you, Dr. Glover. We are very grateful for NIH's continuing support for SBIR and STTR. Mr. Glover, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman Biggert, other members of the committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm Jere Glover, Executive Director of the Small Business Technology Council of the National Small Business Association. We represent the 7,000 SBIR companies that are active in the SBIR program today. America is certainly not doing enough to promote innovation, especially given the state of competition from foreign countries that are graduating more scientists and engineers than we are, and the state of our economy today. Our share of the global technology market is declining. 10 foreign countries have copied the SBIR program, major countries. Witness after witness, GAO study after GAO study, report after report say the program is working remarkably well and has for 26 years. Please don't mess it up. The SBIR program isn't broken. It doesn't need fixing. Please make changes that are limited and monitored carefully, and that make sure the agencies, the GAO and the National Academy of Sciences, report fully on those changes and how they affect the program and how they affect the technology community. Asking small business to trust the government, to allow the agencies to be flexible, to allow the government to change or modify the program, that is small businesses' only real portal or access to the federal R&D dollars, is like waving a red flag in front of small business. 30 years of experience with government has proven that small business will come out on the short end. Little has changed in the federal R&D marketplace in the past 30 years. Small business share of the federal R&D market was 3.5% in 1978. It has now increased to 4.3% in 30 years. But the technology marketplace has changed, and changed significantly. In 1978, small business employed only 6% of the scientists and engineers in America. Today, according to the National Science Foundation Science Indicators, that number has gone up to 38%. Small businesses receive 38% of all U.S. patents, and SBIR companies have received over 60,000 patents and are patenting at the rate of basically 5,000 patents per year. Where do innovation come from? One of the more surprising studies recently is looking at where the innovation come from. According to the R&D Top 100 Innovations, small business has gone from zero, SBIR companies from zero in 1982 when the program started, to now having 25% of all American key innovations. At the same time, large firms have dropped from 40 innovations per cycle down to under 10. So small business is where the job creation is really happening. Let me just mention that there's a lot of discussion of where the SBIR program should be focused. It has always focused on the first three basic parts of this: basic research, applied research, and development. The commercialization has always been beyond the SBIR program, and it should be. For example, the entire HHS budget would not fund one single drug going through their application. My friend Jim Greenwood has pointed out that it takes $800 million. The HHS entire budget would not even fund one. We have to be realistic. When you get into the commercial arena, this program and the federal government simply don't have the funds to pick enough winners to make it work. The economic impact of the SBIR program, the job creation just as of small business, if you look at this indication, small business has led us out of every recession, and they are doing will continue to do that. The economic impact of the SBIR program, if you look in the back of my testimony, you'll see green pages, and they have information on each specific congressional district or the states of the various members. What is important to point out is that this SBIR program, using a random selection of states, those represented on this subcommittee, have received $6.5 billion of SBIR awards. Currently, in the last 5 years, there are almost $2 billion involved. And those companies have created over 100,000 jobs, or maintained, I should say, maintained 100,000 jobs, and have filed from 14 patents just for the members in the states that are represented on this subcommittee. It's a wonderful program. It has worked extremely well. The universities and small business have worked well together, and that have been improving and working well. We are starving the most productive sector of the small business economy, the high-tech small business companies, and underfunding the most prolific scientists and engineers. That, in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, is why we are losing in the international market share and what we need to do to improve our economy. We need to continue. We can't continue down this road with small business receiving less than 5% of the federal R&D dollars and expect the technology innovation to lead us out of the recession and into a larger share of the global technology market. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glover. While I may not completely agree with all your substantive points, I sure do wish that I could talk like you. I've always wanted to have a Southern accent. I've always wanted to be a Western cowboy, but there are just some things that aren't going to happen in this life. I do want to mention that I believe our ranking member needs to step away at 3:15. And we have agreement that the hearing may continue in the absence of any Republican members. And we look forward to Mr. Smith joining us, and I just want to reiterate that Ms. Edwards will be stepping in for me momentarily, and I aspire to return to continue some of the discussion. Now it is appropriate for us to open to questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Glover makes a point in both his oral and his written testimony for a 5% set aside, and I am sympathetic to some set aside increase, but I'd like to get the views of Dr. Berdahl, even though you have stated your preference, and Mr. Greenwood and Dr. Rockey. First of all, Dr. Berdahl, when you say you like the program to stay the same, I assume you mean that you want the set-aside to stay the same, and that you're not stating that you want every aspect of the program to stay the same.
That's correct.
Microphone, please.
We favor the current set-aside provision. We also favor greater flexibility in the agency's ability to apply, as many of my colleagues here at the table have also recommended. But we believe that the current set-aside is sufficient, and that in many instances clearly adequate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Berdahl. Mr. Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, it would be in the interest of our companies if we had a larger share of the NIH pool available to us, and I would like to see that day arrive. Having said that, I served in the Congress when we doubled the NIH budget. It was a good and noble thing that we did. I think many of us failed to understand why providing level funding at best after that was a mistake. We sort of took the attitude that, nobody gets their budget doubled, so if, stop complaining about lack of growth. But it was a mistake, and we really need, we need to continue to grow the NIH budget at a reasonable, at least inflationary factor annually. I would presume that that an effort to get much beyond where we are now would meet resistance from my friend to my right and his colleagues, and that perhaps such a
the friend on your left also
perhaps. So perhaps if and when the time comes that the Congress can see fit to significantly increase the size of the pie, would probably be the best time to discuss changing the ratio of the slices.
May I take your answer to mean in an ideal world, yes?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. Dr. Rockey, please.
NIH would favor keeping the set aside at the current 2.8% level.
Combined for both.
Combined for
STTR
both.
and
We would
SBIR.
find this sufficient to meet our current mission. And as Mr. Greenwood had just mentioned, we have appreciated that as the NIH budget had grown and doubled essentially from 1998 to 2003, we were able to also sustain a doubling in the SBIR program as well. So we feel that that level is appropriate just to meet the mission of NIH and to support innovation in the small business community.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Dr. Rockey. I just want to say that I think everyone that I can think of in this institution is a fan of NIH, and for good reason. It's because y'all do really, really good work. I'm also happy to hear that you do support a 2.5% set aside for SBIR and a 0.3 set aside for STTR. So that leads to my next question. In the American Recovery Act era, better known as the stimulus bill, the additional billions that NIH is to receive were specifically exempted from the SBIR requirement. Do you know if anyone from NIH asked for that exemption?
Well, I can tell you that I had concerns at the time that the ERA, or the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was being discussed. I had concerns regarding the ability to have enough SBIR, STTR applications in the pool. Originally, when we were discussing ERA, the methodology that NIH was going to use to use the ERA funds was to take existing applications, both in the SBIR program and in all of our programs, and to fund those, to get those funds out the door immediately. Because of the decreasing numbers of SBIR applications and the increasing success rate, the applications that we would have had at hand were the 2008 applications, and we simply would not have had enough applications to meet the 2.8%.
Let's return to the question. Did you or anyone else at NIH ask for that exemption?
I raised concerns, yes.
Did you raise that concern with Congress?
No, I did not.
Did someone from NIH raise that concern with Congress?
I can't tell you exactly how the process was, the negotiation with Congress. The Congress had indicated that they asked questions of if there were any concerns with the entire
Someone from NIH
SBIR.
volunteered that?
Yes, I expressed my concerns. How the process, I can get back to you for the record of how the process.
Yes, I'd be very interested in hearing that for the record.
Sure.
I have a letter for the record from the two senators, Mary Landrieu and Olympia Snowe, and it's answered by a letter from Acting Director Kington.
Yes.
And in it, the acting director commits to leaving the 2.8% set aside for SBIR and STTR, that NIH intends to adhere to that. And I take it that you agree with the director's answer in that letter.
Yes, that letter, he agreed to the 2.8% out of our appropriation. We are also, NIH is also using ERA funds to support SBIR
ERA is an
application.
appropriation.
I understand that.
Yes.
So,
So we're in agreement on that.
our 2.8% of our $30 billion appropriation, yes.
But 2.8% of also the ERA funds.
Those funds according to the legislation, we're not subject to the
But I take the
set-aside.
letter as a voluntary commitment to maintain the 2.8% set aside.
Again, I guess it's the interpretation of the letter. I would not interpret the letter to say that. I believe what he's saying is
Then
that he
can
was.
we have a resolution of
Sure,
that
sure.
disagreement, perhaps with the NIH staff and with the Senate Small Business Committee and the
Sure.
House Small Business Committee? Deeply appreciate that.
I appreciate
Thank you for going over a little bit with me.
Can I
Mr.
point-
Greenwood, do you have a further point to make?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I've spoken with both Senator Specter and his staff on this, and as we all know, Senator Specter was instrumental in this. And my understanding is that the language, while it may not require the NIH to set aside 2.8%, nor does it prohibit them from setting aside up to that amount.
That is my interpretation of the statutory language also. It is a pretty clearly crafted carve-out. Things like that don't happen by accident, but it does seem quite permissive. With that, I'd like to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony. I have Argonne National Lab in my district, and I have a lot of spin-off companies. And what happens so many times is that they have a product that they're working on, and they get through the original, the first couple of steps until they get to, they get through the demonstration project. And then they want to get to the commercialization. And so they might have gotten the loans and whatever. And then they come to me to see what we can do to help them, that further step. They can build the small demonstration project, but to go to that full step. And obviously this is something that either venture capital funding is necessary, or they want an earmark, which obviously is a lot of money, which makes that kind of out of the question. But and you don't want to expand the program. What can we do for that valley of death that can bridge the gap there? Is there any? There was some talk about gap funding or whatever. Is there, Dr. Rockey?
Again, we have a number of programs, or excuse me, we fund a fast track program that allows phase 1 and phase 2. We also give a renewal of the phase 2, which in part addresses this issue, although it only gets you a small way to funding the gap. And that's why I believe that the NRC's report, which discusses the importance of venture capital, is significant in this case, particularly for biomedical research projects that may be very long-term, very expansive, take a long time between for the clinical portion of it. And so we recognize that this is a serious issue and would like to look at ways to provide some flexibility for that more extensive research and development that needs to be going on.
Do you see also with this economic situation that we're in that the venture capitalists aren't don't have the ability to fund too? Are there some really projects that you see that are going, that are not going to go through because they don't have that?
I think that's a possibility. I think what you may be seeing is venture capitalists are not taking on new ventures, and they're digging into the current investments that they've made, and thus, if we had a way also to allow them to also take on new venture as well, I think that would be very beneficial to the whole small business community.
Dr. Berdahl, why do you think that this was put in with the affiliation if a venture capitalist company that have to include those members of the venture capital as well as any other business that they're involved in, counting the number of employees?
Why was it put in the initial legislation, do you mean?
Why, which really I think causes a lot of these companies not to be able to get the funding as well as venture capital.
Yeah. I think that obviously the availability of venture capital is harder to come by in the current climate. It's more difficult for young scientists or investigators who have developed something that has commercial value to be able to move to the proof of concept and scaling up phase of this, and the modeling that's required to assure venture capitalists that it has commercial value and potential commercial success. And although the current SBIR program partially recognizes this issue, it often falls short of being able to reach the level of development necessary to assure investors that that a product has commercial viability. And so I think that we should be thinking very hard about how we can push these new technologies over this valley of death or across the gap, however one wants to describe it. That certainly, I think, is in the interest of the nation and in the interest of the scientists developing these products. We'd welcome the opportunity to think with the committee about and explore ways in which it might enable our universities, which also are pretty hard hit by this economy and don't have the resources in many cases to assist or the ability to assist in driving these developments over this gap. So there should be, I hope, some way in which we can extend the horizon for development of research advances and new technologies.
Do you think that just to remove the counting of the people
I
that
think
are
that's
in the
a very important first step. Absolutely.
What would you do further then?
Well, possibly an additional program of some sort. I don't favor increasing the set aside as a means of doing that, because I'm not sure that we have an indication that there are enough able applicants.
Mr. Greenwood, what would you think that would solve the problem, just not to count the employees or of the venture capitalists or their affiliates?
I think that's part of the solution, and I think it would reflect the original intent of the Congress. I think that what those affiliation rules really were interpretations made by the bureaucracy at SBA and doesn't reflect. It reflects neither the original congressional intent nor, I would think, current congressional intent. But certainly, changing the rules with regard to the majority-backed VCs is critical. The companies who are doing important biomedical research that will have huge potential to relieve human suffering and premature death face the valley of death, whether they are or are not backed by 50% plus one of venture capital dollars. And keep in mind that what's important here is that these companies, if you are a drug discovery company, you cannot get very far down the road without VC funds. And what we're talking about here is not, it's very, very rare that one venture capital firm comes in and provides more than half of the funds for one of these companies. It's usually the case that several of them in the aggregate do. So maybe this one's providing 10% and this one's providing 10% and so forth. And none of that alters either the fact that these are still small companies, and B, that they're making, as judged by the NIH reviewers, they're making important contributions to research that has great potential for humanity.
Great. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. And thank you to the witnesses. I want to explore, if we could, for a bit, the implementation of the SBIR program, because it seems to me that obviously we have one agency in front of us, a big one to be sure, but there are wide variances in the implementation across the agencies of the program. And I understand your testimony with regard to flexibility and nimbleness across the agencies, but it makes it really tough to gauge from one agency to the next whether there's consistency in terms of the implementation of the program and whether we're getting to the targeted need. And so I wonder if you would comment about the possibility or explore the possibility of some way that we can aggregate data, that we have some way across agencies of analyzing the effectiveness, the relative effectiveness. I mean, if NIH is doing it in the right way that makes sense for that agency, what is the cross-fertilization with other agencies?
So we have, of course, we have a number of ways, as you mentioned, Congresswoman Edwards, regarding and analyzing our own data. And also through the SBA, we have some data available that at least will give you information on firms, and we can do some analysis. I think the issue about how the SBIR program is implemented at each agency is an important one, and it becomes particularly important in your reauthorization, because I think it's good to look at best practices and what has worked well for each agency. I will say that the sectors that are being supported by each agency are quite different, and thus ultimately the flexibility that is allowed does help promote the particular type of program that is necessary to support that kind of sector that, for example, biomedical field that NIH would be working with, as opposed to some of the more in the physical sciences or other small businesses that might be, for example, DOE or DOD. So I think it's important not only to understand those flexibilities, but understand best practices and their relationships to how the programs are managed for the particular sectors.
Mr. Glover.
We have the National Academy of Sciences 5-year study that went into this at some length, and it did a very good job of analyzing what the agencies are doing. The conclusions were that the program is remarkable, that it's working very good. This is a data-driven, well-analyzed study. A lot of information is there. There is flexibility within the programs. The couple of basic things that are important to realize is it has the most remarkable rate of success of any of the federal R&D programs. Approximately half of the technologies make it to the marketplace in some shape or form or fashion, and that is quite successful. NIH just mentioned you're close to 50%. The Department of Defense is close to 50%. The other agencies are not quite that good, but are still in there. So the program is quite good. That's why I say we have to be very careful on how we change it. Allowing large size awards, much bigger awards, for example, NIH talks about the number of applicants have dropped. Well, quite frankly, the number of awards dropped too. Which one came first? Chicken, egg? I don't know, but they both went down together. So we've got to be careful that we don't crowd out good innovations by giving a few large or super jumbo awards or multiple awards. It crowds out a lot of other technologies that may be coming along. The SBIR program was designed to fill the earliest stage. One of the things I looked at for each of the states represented on this committee is whether seed and angel financings to your states were bigger than SBIR awards. The answer is they're not. That early stage, the only source of money is SBIR. And that's why I think you've got to be careful about watching what you're doing. It's working remarkably well across all the agencies.
Well, let me just ask this because it gets to this, the question around, I think that there was some suggestion that the changes that essentially screened out the venture capital-based backed programs contributed to the decline. I don't know what analytical data we have that suggests that's true, but if we do have it, I'd be interested in seeing it. And what I wonder, the current economic environment that Ms. Biggert talked about, I think, one could make an analysis that perhaps that's contributed as well to the decline in applications. And I come out of doing private sector, nonprofit grant making, and I always know that you always get many more applicants than you can ever fund. At the same time, there's always a percentage of those that are just not worth funding at all, no matter how much money you ever had. But my experience has been there's always, a sector of them, maybe even it's above the 2.8% that you go, if we just had some more, we actually might want to do that. And so I question, what seems like a really, at least for most of you, a very sort of clear indication that there's no need to increase the set aside. And then we have testimony from Mr. Glover that, for a 5% set aside, and I'm not even sure why 5% and why not 2.9% or 3%. And so there must be, some room in there, both from the agency and small business standpoint, but also looking at the percentage set aside numbers, it says, well, maybe there is at least some room for movement on the set aside. Mr. Greenwood, or Dr. Rockey.
The first thing I would say is that, first reflecting on your comment that you get a certain number of applications and not all of them are the best, well, almost by definition. But if you think about what we're trying to accomplish here in the big picture, it is all about advancing the mission of the National Institute in terms of our industry, advancing the mission of the National Institute of Health, and making sure that the particular alacrity, the particular level of entrepreneurship and risk-taking that small companies can take involved in because they don't have large overhead, they don't have large bureaucracies, those skills are applied to the search for treatments for diseases. And the best way to make that happen, I think, and to get the greatest number of very qualified applications is to expand the application pool back to just what it was prior to 2004, and that's to allow these venture-backed companies to participate. You will undoubtedly get a significant number of very qualified applications, making the process more competitive and and that competition, I'm sure, will inspire excellence.
Thank you, and I'll turn the chair back over to Chairman Wu.
I thank all the members and the witnesses for keeping a lively discussion going while I had to step away for another commitment just momentarily. And if I rework any territory that has already been explored or thoroughly explored, please apprise me, and we will move on. I came back in during this discussion of the set-aside, and I very much understand and appreciate that this is a delicate balance, and it is a difficult balance. One can pick 1.0%, 2.0%, 2.5%, 3.5%, 5%, and it is basically a value judgment about the appropriate role of tech transfer and tech development versus fundamental research. There's no getting away from that. But that's the line drawing that this institution engages in on a continual basis. Mr. Glover, I emphatically want to help small business in this endeavor, and it is an effort to help small business that we looked at increasing the set-aside so that although the total amount of funds is going up because of increased research funds, we wanted to grow the pie for everybody so that no one would be left out as we try to get more people in, applicants in, and at the same time increase the size of grants. So I'm very sensitive to your concerns. I just note that there is some significant resistance to changing set-asides, and I think I understand those concerns also. Dr. Rockey, there was, approximately 40% drop in applications to NIH starting in 2004, and that is roughly correlated with the date of the ALJ decision banning venture capital investment, which came down in 2003. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, we want to work out something that helps this program remain an innovation as well as a small business program. And it's in that spirit, Mr. Glover, that I'm asking you, to the extent that you know, would you say that a substantial percentage, perhaps even a majority of your paying membership, if you have paying membership, are in the defense industry or funded through DOD? SBIR funds?
They're not. Our current chairman basically has a significant number of NIH awards, and is probably one of the top NIH award
Right,
companies.
but that's
many of the other companies are as well.
Well,
we're across the whole spectrum.
Well, Mr. Glover, in looking at some of the data, it seems to me that the organizations that you have brought in, when I've dug underneath, every single one of them was on a DoD SBIR.
Mr. Chairman, very few. We've only had one witness appear before this committee from the Small Business Technology Council.
Oh, I mean the folks who came to my office.
Oh, I'm not sure who all have come to your office, but there's certainly half of the program is DoD, and many companies that are in other areas are also in DoD.
Well, Mr. Glover, I'm asking this as a friendly question.
I understand that,
and I'm trying to find some basis which hopefully gets us away from capital structure as a proxy for either domestic ownership or as a proxy for the character of a small business, because I think 500 employees is quite crisp on that front. It seems to me that a lot of Mr. Greenwood's issues have to do with biotechnology, and they're also software and hardware companies that burn a lot of cash. But if it is the case that DoD uses SBIR in a fundamentally different way as an adjunct to its research, as a spur to innovation by the large defense contractors, then perhaps what we can do, if we can't get away with an intellectually pure solution of getting away from capital structure as a proxy for size, of at least taking a substantive approach of perhaps exempting DoD from the new statute. And that is the avenue that I'm trying to explore with you as an alternative, which may be even more palatable to your membership than the generous concessions which we made in negotiation in the last Congress to take into consideration the very real concerns that your membership has.
It certainly solves the problem for approximately half of our members. Of those members who are in the health sciences and the biotech, there are a lot of very good, important, small biotech companies who are working very hard to survive. The only source of funding—
Do any of those small biotech companies not have venture capital investment?
Absolutely. Many of them do not have venture capital, and they are successful.
Would you characterize those companies currently?
Well, some are here today. The state of Maryland has a wonderful program for angel investors that's making some of our biotech companies in Maryland grow very nicely. You got a 50% tax credit for investing in those companies. They've gone to that source. They've been able to raise angel capital to move their companies. There are many successful biotech companies that don't get angel
Earlier, Mr. Glover, you said that the HHS SBIR budget would be insufficient to commercialize one pharmaceutical. Are you saying now that these small biotechs can make it on angel investment alone?
Many have so far.
Then are you?
But I'm talking. But now, when you talk about—
Are you going to take back what you said about HHS and its SBIR program?
No, sir. There's a very clear distinction. Mr. Greenwood has said many times that it takes $800 million to take one drug through the FDA approval process. There are an awful lot of technologies that don't have to go through that $800 million process. But those that have to go through that process, you couldn't use the whole HHS budget to take one drug through that process.
Mr. Greenwood, I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to this conversation.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I do want to respond to one thing you said earlier. I was very careful about believing the information and data that I provided. I did footnote virtually everything I said so that you can, at a time, take a chance to look at that. We're very careful about that.
I read your submissions to the subcommittee with great interest,
yeah,
and in detail.
Thank you, sir. But I did footnote as much as I could because, quite frankly, that kind of information is shocking to the innovation community.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Glover. Mr. Greenwood, would you care to respond?
Oh, wait, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bit of a mystery to me because I think to some extent Mr. Glover's membership and mine are they're not entirely mutually exclusive, but they seem to be fairly different. The companies in bio, the companies that I am here to represent, are fundamentally drug discovery companies. They're companies that patent molecules. To some extent, they're platform companies, but for the most part, they are moving forward trying to get drugs into clinical trials and into the FDA approval process. And that, of course, is a challenge that takes hundreds of millions of dollars. And you cannot get very far down that path without having to rely on venture capital investment. In fact, without having to rely on a majority of your funds coming from venture capital. So companies that can do well year after year on SBIR grants are not companies that have as their core competency drug discovery and development. I'm not, frankly, quite sure what these companies are doing. I'm not suggesting that it's not valuable. Sometimes I wonder if the core competency is succeeding in getting SBIR grants, but they're certainly not companies that are moving down the path towards drug discovery, which is largely what the NIH is trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. I just want to return for a moment to what are very legitimate concerns of the different parties to this discussion. Mr. Greenwood was addressing small biotechs, which I think share some characteristics with software and hardware startups. Frequently, they are VC funded. They are looking to a hockey puck growth where hopefully if they succeed, they will rocket up in size and employment and revenues. And the VC investor fundamentally wants his or her money back times 60 if possible. What I was trying to encourage Mr. Glover to think about, and this I only learned recently, that there's been an unfortunate bitterness between the different sides of this debate. And I am familiar with high-tech startups. I was unfamiliar until very recently with an entire industry, which is very, very important, which is primarily concentrated in defense, which does have repeat SBIR grants, but for good policy reasons. Frequently, there are only a few large defense contractors left in a given field, and not only, as Mr. Glover covered, the small entrepreneurial companies have, weight for weight, more research going on. And the small companies not only innovate new products and in essence, by getting contracts repeatedly from the DoD, are forming the backbone of some very important research for DoD, but by being small entrepreneurial companies, they also spur the big companies because DoD is able to come to the big contractors and say, look, those guys came up with better body armor, why can't you? Now, that is a very legitimate use of repeat SBIR grants, I think. I'd like to carve something out so that we can all live with this, so that we don't have to live with what, in my view, is not only a very crude, but an erroneous ALJ decision is made by one person in Boston, ironically, but it has excluded majority VC-owned companies or companies that in the aggregate have many minority VC owners, but in the aggregate have majority VC ownership. And the aggregation rules also are a problem for these companies. And as Dr. Rockey points out, there is a problem with a drop-off in applications to NIH. And we can't all count on positive outcomes or cures from these many companies. But I believe that they're very, very important. And we should have a crafted balance to bring that process back into harmony. Mr. Glover, I want to give you another opportunity to talk about the relative weights of your membership versus Mr. Greenwood's.
Quite frankly, we do have members who are involved in both organizations. Some of our members cannot afford to be Mr. Greenwood's organization. They simply can't afford the dues, but they share many of the common characteristics and traits. There is a lot of overlap between the two organizations. I think we feed to his organizations. As our folks get bigger and grow, they probably do end up in his organization. There are many parts of NIH that are not related to drug development. And I think that you have to be a little careful in that we're looking at an $800 million solution to a problem that SBIR is not designed to fix. There's no way that this program is big enough to fund drug approval process to the FDA. But I think that there is probably some way to shape a compromise that goes along that way, but we have to keep a whole variety of biotech companies that have succeeded and been effective in the program. And we can't allow a few large giant companies with large awards or giant money, lots of money, not giant companies, but with lots of backing, to crowd out all the other companies. And what we've seen is NIH is some large awards have in effect crowded out the number of awards that could be given. If you, for example, give a $10 million award, then you've foreclosed a lot of other companies that could have competed. So there's a balance here, and I have to tell you that my membership is far more concerned about competing with well-funded venture capital companies than I was when I first got involved in this process. They are genuinely concerned about the process. Remember, the company that started this at SBA, that decision was the administrative law judge looked at it and said, AIG's Swiss venture capital company and a Canadian venture capital company own this company. We don't want money to go to that company. That's what it was. It was not local U.S. venture capital companies. It was AIG's Swiss company and a Canadian venture capital company. And he looked at it and said, this program is designed to help American businesses. No.
Well, Mr. Glover, I see that you have spent some time in this organization and on this Hill. But I recommend to you two things. The next time you want to engage in Canadian bashing, think first about their actions in saving our folks in the Tehran embassy and the longest undefended border between any two countries the world has ever seen. Secondly, I think that a few organizations get away with no, no, never, never, we're not going to bend 1 inch. For whatever reason, the NRA comes to mind, although I'm a loyal firearm owner. But most organizations can't get away with that. And I'm glad to hear, Mr. Glover, that your organization is willing to bend and reach reasonable compromises which take care of the legitimate interests of your membership and all the other folks out there, and as well as the technologic needs and employment needs of this country. We will return momentarily, but I thank Mr. Lujan, the gentleman from New Mexico, for his forbearance. But I might add that we've kept the discussion alive so that Mr. Lujan could be next in asking his questions. The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and I won't take long. I think that this is a great conversation, Mr. Chairman, and both with what Ms. Edwards and yourself have been able to move forward, and I think get some answers today, is get some more discussion along those lines would be great. Dr. Rockey, why do you think the number of applicants has dropped?
It's been almost like the perfect storm. We really don't understand the entirety of why the applications have dropped. We have mentioned the question about eligibility with the venture capital companies as being perhaps a component. We also mentioned about the complexity of determining eligibility and whether or not a company is eligible. There's a number of companies, because of the linear fashion of this program, which is a phase 1 and phase 2, perhaps their model does not fit within the SBIR phase 1, phase 2 approach. And in addition, there's just some companies I think feel overwhelmed by the entire process of applying for SBIR grants. So there's a number of things that go on. I can't say that we understand it exactly. I think Chairman Wu had pointed out, or Congresswoman Edwards, about the the complexity of this issue, and really if we had any actual data that would support our understanding. We really don't. There's a number of things that have come together, and we really would have to tease out all of those different aspects to be able to understand it.
Anything specific with venture capital participation?
Well, as we said, the ruling at the same time we saw a drop in applications. Whether or not that's a direct correlation, we can't say, but we did see that drop.
Okay. And Mr. Glover, along the questioning I think that the chairman was pursuing, isn't it true that a small business can be disqualified where multiple venture firms each have a minority stake, but in the aggregate own a majority of the company's shares?
That's the current the situation.
And isn't it true that many small companies in this situation have been excluded from the SBIR program since the reinterpretation since 2003?
We looked at, some years later, the NIH gave us an analysis, and they said that I think after the first 2 or 3 years, they looked at it, only 50 companies had been excluded. A number of those were foreign-owned companies. A number of those had grown beyond 500 employees, and that it turned out to be very few actually had been excluded based on the analysis NIH did at the time. Clearly, there are companies that have been excluded. I'm not saying they're not. I don't think there's a huge number of them, but I think there certainly have been companies excluded.
Okay. And Mr. Glover, you also stated that Congress should renew SBIR without major design changes. Are there any changes, in your opinion, that should be considered or that would increase the effectiveness of these programs?
Certainly, we've suggested that the award size needs to go up. It hasn't gone up. SBA has proposed raising it. It certainly should be raised for inflation. We think that there are some additional suggestions. For example, there needs to be some additional commercialization, and I think everybody recognizes we need to find some way to move the technology readiness level from where it comes out of the SBIR program closer to commercialization. The founder of the program, Roland Tibbetts, in his paper, analysis is attached to my testimony, very specific. This program is not a commercialization program, but moving it closer to commercialization, doing some testing and evaluation, some additional funding. There are good programs like the TIP program, the old ATP program, that's designed to move technology further down. There clearly needs to be something else done in that area. Whether it's in addition to the SBIR program or whether it's something freestanding, we really do have a problem. We're trying to get small business up to the valley of death to look in. Everybody else says we got to get it across. I'm just saying we need to get more up to it, but we also need a bridge across that valley of death. So there needs to be something extra. I'm flexible on how that works, but I think it clearly needs to be something that goes beyond. But I don't think we want to take away from the base program that we have now.
Thank you.
To do that.
And lastly, Mr. Greenwood, Dr. Rockey, I mentioned this in the first response to my question. You also brought this to our attention through your testimony with the application process. What can be done to increase the effectiveness or awareness, participation, competition within the program? And to get your thoughts on that, Mr. Chairman, then I'd make sure that we would yield back any excess time that I've consumed today.
That would be fine.
Thank you. I'm going to sound like a one-trick pony because I am on the subject, and it has to do, if you want to get more competition and more excellence in the program, you have to go back to the original congressional intent and overrule statutorily this ill-found decision by the ALJ that excludes majority-backed venture capital companies. A couple of conjectures that need to be put to rest. This idea that somehow when allowing these companies to participate crowds out the other applications. The National Research Council study found no evidence that participation of companies with multiple VC ownership was harmful to the program or that small businesses have ever been crowded out by the participation of small businesses that are majority owned by VCs. So that is not a concern at all. Another thing that's important here is that no one is suggesting that SBIR money is what gets companies through the process, the multiple $100 million process of moving to the FDA approval. What really happens is a biotech company will have a molecule that it thinks might cure brain cancer. And venture capitalists will look at that, look at the intellectual property and say, you know what, we think you're right. And we want to invest $10 million or $15 million in that. And that program might become eligible for an SBIR grant. Now, meanwhile, back in the laboratory, the scientists are saying, you know, this molecule might also cure prostate cancer, breast cancer, might have another application. And they want some seed money to get that process started. And the venture capitalists are saying, no, 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 no. We put our money on the brain cancer application. So then it becomes perfectly appropriate for that company to come back with an application and say, this is a secondary project that holds great potential to cure human disease as well. And we think it makes perfect sense, even though that company has venture capital funding, to come back to the NIH and say, what about this? Does this look like a good project that you might want to fund as well? So we think that, again, for all of those reasons, that and particularly going back to the original congressional intent, and as the chairman said, it was never was it the intent of Congress, and nor is it rational to make financial structure a proxy for smallness.
Mr. Greenwood, I'll interrupt while you're quoting me with approval. I have a request from the minority to adhere more closely to the 5-minute time limit, which is somewhat unusual, but I intend to abide by that request. So if you could draw your comments to a close, and when Mr. Lujan is ready to yield back.
I have.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I would just close with, we had a phenomenal conversation with Secretary Chu with his visit to Los Alamos National Laboratories in New Mexico, talking about the importance of R&D, science and technology innovation, looking to see what kind of projects we should be supporting, recognizing that 8 of the 10 may fail, but it's those 2 that succeed and the breakthroughs that we would yield from them with solving domestic problems and global problems. And that's why we need to be supporting projects like this, so we can get these products to market. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lujan, you had Secretary Chu at a national lab, and you didn't invite me. And all this time, I just always talk you up as a very valued contributing member of the subcommittee.
Mr. Chairman, next time we'll make sure we invite you. But Mr. Chairman, we had a 24-hour notice, and I'm not sure we could have gotten many more people up to the laboratories. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. And now
Mr. Chairman, could I just mention one thing about national labs?
If Mr. Smith will permit that, I would be happy to.
The other thing about where innovations come from, the national labs has done remarkably well. That's the biggest increase in innovations, key innovations is the national labs. It's really quite a remarkable success story.
Thank you, Mr. Glover. The gentleman from Nebraska, 5 minutes. Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
Thank you. I apologize. This might be begging for a long answer, but if you could be as brief as possible. Could you comment on the National Academy of Sciences review that of SBIR that found the program is not sufficiently evidence-based and in need of improved data collection on program outcomes and performance metrics to measure its impact? Could you respond to that? Go ahead, Dr.
In my testimony, I mentioned the fact that that is a recommendation of the National Academies, and certainly one that we endorse. Indeed, perhaps much of the discussion that has been conducted here in this hearing today could have benefited from some more rigorous data that we might have acquired if we had really done the kind of analysis as between agencies and so forth that would yield some evidence that would help shape policy.
Anyone else wishing to respond? Mr. Barber?
I would just comment that there is a lot more information about the SBIR program than virtually any other federal R&D program. It's quantified. It's been studied by GAO a number of times, and the National Academy study is a 5-year, $5 million study. There's an awful lot of information about it. We can never get enough information when we're trying to evaluate and make decisions, but there's a lot more here than there is on most other programs.
Okay.
I would also say that I would agree with Dr. Berdahl, and I had mentioned earlier that understanding our drop in applications would have been a lot easier had we had some evidence base. We've done a number of studies on the SBIR program. As you know, the NRC just did theirs. We also have our own PODS database, which is really a way to look at commercialization and what happens. In addition, the SBA has a database called TechNet, which also can help us with some evidence base. But we would agree that there should be and could be more evidence-based analysis of this program.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Greenwood, if you could give an example of the kind of companies that BIO believes should be made eligible for SBIR funding through a change in eligibility rules, and how such a company might compare to others that are currently eligible in terms of employees, revenue, and other things.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Mr. Smith. First off, we think is important is that companies who are small, and because they are small and are not burdened by the huge overhead and bureaucracy of, say, large pharmaceutical companies, they are much more willing to take risk and to go into areas that for which there are no cures right now, no treatments. They're into unknown territory, if you will. These are the kind of companies that we think can contribute the most to advancing the science around solving problems related to human disease. We think that companies that advance the science to the point where the venture capitalists who are increasingly skeptical. If in the beginning, when the human genome was first sequenced in about 2000, any biotech company that emerged was pretty quick to get venture capital funds because it was assumed that there was going to be quick solutions. It's turned out that the problem of using the human genetics, understanding of genetics and DNA is more complicated than it was first thought. So venture capitalists are being skeptical. So when the venture capitalists come in and say, we're going to bet on this company, it's much more likely than it ever has been that this company is really going somewhere, that this is going to be a new breakthrough invention. And so the fact of venture capital investment should be and at times in the program's history, it was an indication that they should merit additional grants, not that they should be turned away. And so we've had a perversion of the original process in which a company that's good enough, the science is good enough and smart enough, and making important breakthroughs to the point where the venture capitalists are willing to risk their money. I think those should be the companies that minimally should be able to compete for SBIR funds, because they obviously have demonstrated the ability to build the talent pool necessary to advance the science.
Thank you. And what about the impact of the recession? Have you seen a change in pattern of application for funds and otherwise?
Well, I don't know that we've had enough time to see that, but we are in trouble. Most of our companies don't have any products on the market. They rely entirely on investor capital for their revenues, and they do so for a very long period of time. And in this credit crunch right now, we're in a position where there's just no money for those. And so we, as I said in my opening statement when you weren't able to be with us, fully a third of our companies are down to their last 6 months in capital, and something like 40% are down to their last, or third down to the last 12 months, and 40% down to the last 6 months. So we're going to, our companies, whether they're majority VC backed or not, are going to be more in need of help in the next 12 months or so than they ever have before. And much will be lost if these companies dissolve.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Mr. Smith, you are prompt. I'm going to have to mend my ways. The gentlelady from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one real question, and it has to do with the moving the process toward commercialization. And Dr. Rockey and Mr. Greenwood, when I hear from small businesses, especially these sort of nimble technology and research firms, and minority-owned business and women-owned business, what they say is they do need that first push. That's why we have the program. But then, you know, a lot of them are not able to get that venture capital at the beginning, but they need something that helps them get there. And so I want to know, actually, within the context of the program, you know, what ability the program allows to even, sort of seed, whether it's consultants or some assistants to get the business plan together to then, move into that next phase and then out to real commercialization. Because I think if you're going to go ahead and make an investment in seeding the research and the technology, and then you just kind of give it away at the time at which it needs to be spurred on, that's a particular dilemma for small women and minority-owned businesses.
And while we haven't invested greatly in this, we do have a number of programs at NIH called CAP and TAP, which are commercialization assistance programs, and some of them are designed specifically for these smaller programs that really need help in just even understanding the process under which they can commercialize. So we have two programs, one of which supports training for those kind of businesses to understand the process, and one for more actual assistance in the commercialization process further down the road. But it is an issue. That is an enormous issue that I believe Mr. Greenwood would relate to many companies, is getting on to that further step.
If I may, as valuable as the SBIR program is, and it has been central to the development of biotechnology in this country, it is not the only source of revenue for early stage companies. And one of the things that I do is travel from state to state talking to governors and state legislators about what they can do to help these companies as well. Every state in the union, in fact, virtually every country in the world right now wants to be a big biotech hub because they see both the opportunity to advance the health of their citizens as well as to advance the economy, because this is a growth industry. So we encourage states to to initiate their own programs. We have, in my state of Pennsylvania, we took tobacco settlement money and created greenhouses, incubation centers for small biotechnology companies to get some of the help, as you suggest, with business plans and that sort of thing. We have a whole catalog of programs that states can engage in order to help all companies, including women-owned minority companies, to get into this field. And frankly, Bio has taken a leading role in trying to bring minorities into this industry, young people of all ages, to demonstrate that this is a real growth field and an opportunity for diversity.
Thank you. And Dr. Rockey, you do feel that in the sort of current structure of the program, you have the flexibility to be able to assist with some of that as well. And I would say my own home state of Maryland, does a tremendous job of seeding this, because we view, like other states, this is definitely a growth industry, at least on the biotech end.
We have some, and we have, as I pointed out, considered a technical assistance in this area for commercialization very appropriate. I will point out that the SBA did have the federal and state partnership program that ended in 2005, the FAST program. I think some of you might have been aware. As an outreach effort, that was also very as helpful, as well as their rural outreach program, which were two programs specifically designed to help bring people in and understand what was happening at a state federal level. So while those programs have gone by the wayside, we have also have extraordinary efforts in outreach. We attempt to outreach. I would mention that we are having our 11th annual SBIR conference in Nebraska this year in Omaha, and so we do think outreach as well as assistance is important in this whole program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, do you have any further questions? Okay. I understand that Mr. Lujan has a further comment to make.
Mr. Chairman, yes, and it's to extend an invitation to the chairman to New Mexico. We'll make sure we have the appropriate hearing scheduled for that invitation, Mr. Chairman. Quickly, Mr. Chairman.
I look forward to it.
We reached out to a few businesses in New Mexico, and one of them, by the name of Southwest Sciences in Santa Fe, New Mexico, is an example of how this program can work. And another example of a small business that is asking for support from the Congress to be able to support the reauthorization, but making sure that the program is made available to other small businesses. Southwest Sciences has now been issued 28 United States patents, all of them on inventions made through the support of SBIR or STTR programs. They've licensed many of the patents to manufacturers who are actively making and selling products in the semiconductor industry, natural gas pipeline industry, environmental monitoring, and atmospheric research applications. And so we just continue to see, Mr. Chairman, not only with us reaching out to businesses, but them reaching out back to us, that shows the jobs that can be created, progress that can be made, and the importance of making sure that capital is going to be made available to especially a lot of these small companies who need that little boost to be able to make great things happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lujan, would you like to enter any of those materials in the record?
Mr. Chairman, we will request, without any objection, to submit a letter from Southwest Sciences into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. As I said, the gentleman from New Mexico is a valued member of the committee and has now works diligently and now has also invited me to New Mexico. I thank the gentleman. Well, the chairman recognizes himself. Ms. Edwards, I'm about to get to your fine state of Maryland. We count on the NIH for innovation, and it has not gone unnoted that in the very thorough materials prepared by Mr. Glover, that there is a tremendous concentration of SBIR companies and employees in the lovely state of Maryland, and we suspect that that may have something to do with NIH innovation. Another arena in which you all have been innovating is phase 2 competition reawards, I would call it. Dr. Rockey, could you describe that program to us? Because I think we share an interest in getting folks over the valley of death, in promoting innovation, in protecting legitimate small business interests. And this may be an interesting tool for us to follow up on as a method of getting over the valley of death, although there are some downsides to it too, perhaps.
So the competitive renewal of Phase 2 is really a Phase 2.5, which allows us to support companies that have successfully completed their phase or in the midst of their Phase 2 and come back in for competition to further their project towards the ultimate goal of commercialization. I would say that in the case of clinical research, we're still preclinical at that stage, but it is taking the projects further down the line. We do support these projects for 3 years. Yeah, for 3 years at $1 million per year, so it's a substantial support, and we do think it's been effective at getting closer to the valley of death, although, as I said, it's usually still preclinical. But we find this as a way to successfully try to navigate this next step, which they otherwise would not have funding for. But I do want to point out that it is a competitive renewal. They are not guaranteed the renewal. They must come in and compete for it, and so they're judged against others who are competing for this as well. But we found it to be a very effective way of promoting the development further along.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rockey. We very much value NIH's innovation in Phase 2 competitive reawards, its innovation with respect to flexibility and grant sizes. I would just like to underscore in a very friendly way that there are those of us who prefer NIH to innovate with a more clear statutory basis, and that is up for discussion. Mr. Glover, would you like to comment on the Phase 2 competitive reward efforts that NIH is engaged in? Is that something that that you view as a positive, negative, or a sideways thing?
We think that's a positive. We think that because it's a gated process where they have to compete again for the additional money, that's important. We also think that it can't be too big, because if you get too much money going into that phase, you're crowding out. You're eating your seed corn. You're not getting enough new ideas coming forward. But we think that so far that seems to be balanced at NIH, and it's a positive. And I think that as long as Congress puts a gated process in and provides some additional funding for this kind of activity, it's a great idea.
Well, Mr. Glover, I just want to point out that you and your organization might feel that our $2.2 million Phase 2 award was way too high last go round, but I think that in view of your support of a Phase 2 competitive reaward, there's flexibility on these numbers. Mr. Greenwood, would you care to comment on this Phase 2 recompetition?
I would like to, but I can't. I don't know enough about it to give you good information.
Hopefully we will have the benefit of your organization's thoughts.
We'll submit it in writing if the chairman would like.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And with that, I guess there are not going to be comments from any other members of the subcommittee. If our witnesses are not going to volunteer anything for the good of the order, then I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon and spending a decent chunk of time with us. It has been, I think, edifying for all members, and I hope that it is part of a collaborative process as we go forward to have an SBIR program that helps stimulate innovation, stimulate small business and employment, and the production of new products, new services, and life-saving therapies, and also helps keep our defense and other industries strong. The record will remain open for additional statements from members and for answers to any follow-up questions that the committee may ask of the witnesses. Again, I want to thank the witnesses, and you're excused and thanked profusely for your participation. The meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.